and then, yeah, thanks, Ashrat. So good evening, everyone. I'm Pranita, and I welcome you all on behalf of SINE for this Parar Biotech series. Just to briefly introduce SINE, for those who are not aware about, SINE is a technology business incubator of IIT Bombay, and we provide start to scale support to the startup innovators, entrepreneurs through different offerings such as hand-holding, then grant programs, funding, connection with the ecosystem. And we are conducting this Power Hour sessions regularly, where we are bringing various sessions on different topics, though it could be from different domain, agri domain, food tech, med tech, healthcare, industrial biotechnology. And previously, moreover, today we are going to talk about ISO for medical devices. And previously, we have conducted, in the last month, we have conducted one session, which was an overview of quality management system, ISO 13485 session. So now we are moving forward, and we have arranged another talk on ISO 14971 and IEC 62366, that is risk management and usability engineering for medical devices. And these standard are maintaining these quality management standards are very, very important for any medical device startup. And for this session, we have requested Dr. Sanjay Joshi to to address our audience. He has previously done for this quality management system ISO 13485, and today he'll be speaking about risk management and usability engineering for medical device. I have already introduced Sanjay in the previous session, but for those who have not really, those who have not attended previous session or missed that part, I would like to introduce Sanjay for them. Sanjay is basically IIT Bombay alumni, and he's a senior director of software with 2 decades of product development experience in the medical device industry. And he's currently with the Globus Medical, where he has served multiple leadership roles in design, development, and launch of innovative products. Sanjay has led implementation of best practices for software engineering, lean quality management system, good documentation practices. And he's also an IIT Bombay alumni, as I've already mentioned. He has done his BTech from Electrical Engineering, IIT Bombay. He also earned his PhD in Electrical Engineering from University of Maryland, Baltimore, country, and MBA from Marquette University, Wisconsin. And he's currently based near Boston, USA. So he's addressing this session very early in the morning. And thank you, Sanjay, for that. And with this brief introduction, I would like to hand over this session to you. And at the same time, I request all the audience to put their questions in the chat box. We can address them towards the end of the session, or we can address them in the middle of the session, where Sanjay might, complete risk management, a discussion about the risk management. We can even take questions during that time as well. We would also like to unmute you if you have any particular question which you want to ask yourself as well. So do raise your hand during Q&A session. So with this, I hand over the session to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Pranita, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone. Good evening to you. And let me share my screen. Pranita, thank you for being the moderator. I hope you guys can see the screen.
Yes, it's
okay.
visible.
Thank you. So today, this is part 2 of our series on medical device standards, and we are going to cover 2 of them today. And the agenda for today's talk is just a quick recap from what we did last time. That was the quality management system session. Then we are going to dig into the 2 standards, one for risk management, one for usability engineering. And this time we are going to see some examples with a completely hypothetical device. So when we talk about standards, there are 2 main bodies where the standards get published and used a lot. And one of them is ISO. It's a very simple URL, iso.org. And the other one is IEC, and that's iec.ch, based in Switzerland. Both these organizations publish standards, and they have their online store where you can buy them. Now keep in mind, these can get pretty expensive. They're about between 13 to 25,000 Indian rupees, and depending on what kind of product you have, you will probably need multiple of these. So, either you can buy those yourself, or if you are working with an incubator, definitely check in with them if they can give you a copy. So moving on, this is a quick recap from the first session that we did, and we took a quick overview of what standards are for. They are created to help us, the medical device manufacturers. They are made by experts that come from either government or industry, and they sometimes seem vague, and in fact they most of the time are vague, and the reason for that is you have the flexibility because you understand best how your product is designed and used. So you get flexibility into implementing some of these standards, and that's why the government bodies will look at your design history file, your documentation, compare that to standard and say, yes, it kind of makes sense. Especially when you are on a startup, when you have the daily rhythm of things going on, getting into the trenches, fighting the battles, looking at the standards actually gives you a breather. You can rise a mile high and look at the big picture, why you are doing this and who it is for and what problem you are solving. So there are two kinds of standards that are used in medical device organizations. The first one is about the process that is used across the organization. This is not per product, and that was the 13485 system that we covered last time. Now, based on the products that you have, different standards apply. Almost all medical devices will definitely use the two that we are going to talk about today, risk management and usability. If you have software or firmware in the product, 62304 applies. If your product is electromechanical, then 60601 family standard applies. And then depending on what other things you have, if you have laser lights, X-rays, biocompatible material, other standards can apply. So the summary from the last session on one slide was basically threefold. One is 13485 advises you to say what you do, and what all activities you do are guided by the standard. And the standard will tell you, in this, what phase of your project you need to do what. The second part is you actually have to do what you say. And the third part, which is critical for audit, is you have to document the evidence that you actually did what you said. It sounds very simple, but most of the time auditors will find holes in that last part, that you are missing evidence of something. So just pay attention to this. My recommendation is use common sense. Do not let the process overwhelm you. And really, there is no secret ingredient. There's no secret sauce to medical device creation, design, manufacturing, and selling, as long as you follow these three golden rules. With that, we'll dive into risk management. And the premise of the standard is every product needs to show that the benefits outweigh the risk. And if the benefits don't outweigh the risk, don't do it. No, that's what government wants you to show, and that's what even your customers would like to see. Now, risk is inherent. The moment you have a device, you can think that, oh, my device is so safe, but there is always a residual risk. And the standard helps you how to define the risk that is associated with its use. And the four concept that you will hear often is what kind of harm will come from the use of that device, the bad thing that can happen. The second is the occurrence. What is the probability or likelihood of that harm? And the third is what we call the sequence of events. What all things need to happen for the harm to occur. And the last one is hazard, what will cause it. And usually it's done exactly the opposite way. But since we are familiar with risk and harms, on this slide, I have it in this order. For your product, you need to say what is acceptable. Yes, it's completely up to you to say what is acceptable. Of course, there are guidelines on how to do it. You have to document how you will control the risk of the harm. And once you have made, designed, manufactured, shipped, sold the product, how will you monitor the risk that comes from your device? So there are 7 sections in the standard that walk you through different phases, and we are going to look at each of them. So the first one is pretty simple. Section 4 talks about process, and like most standards, the standard wants you to write down the process. How will you actually do it? And this is typically done in SOP or standard operating procedure. And in the previous session, we talked about the different procedures or different SOPs you will need. And usually you can either write them yourself, and most people end up buying it from someone. And the SOPs basically require you to perform all the steps that are the rest of the sections for each device. You as the management have responsibility to provide all resources, including people, to do this work. Now, who are competent people? They are really you guys. You are the subject matter expert. You know how your device is constructed, how it works, how it is produced or manufactured, and how do the end users actually use it. It helps to have some experience in risk management process. And again, this is where you can definitely include your incubator or to guidelines, or even to review your risk management plan, your analysis, etc. What you require per device is a plan. And this is again very common for a medical device world, that you always have a plan that says what you will do and deliver, and the evidence that you do it, that you did it. And that evidence is typically the risk analysis document itself and the report at the end of your project, or of the risk. So one question I often get is, do we really have to do it? Because all we do is we design the product, and we have a contract manufacturer who makes the product. And unfortunately, the answer is no, you still own risk management. uh, it ultimately, who is the manufacturer of the device, and that's what really matters. Now, when we talk about manufacturing, there is one interesting aspect called a process FMEA, failure mode effectivity analysis, that basically analyzes what failures could happen during the process of manufacturing. And this is where you need to work with the manufacturing body. It could be either within your company or a contract manufacturer, and that is outside the scope of this talk. But there is one, basically I wanted to just highlight that there is one aspect of risk that you have to consider for contract manufacturing. So the bulk of the standard is about risk analysis, and it always starts with a description of the device. What does the device do? What are the intended uses? What are the foreseeable misuses? And then it gets into what can affect safety. So there are different kind of hazards. One example is high voltage, especially AC voltage, 110 volts to 220 volts. What can happen that will lead to a hazardous situation? For example, there could be a short circuit somewhere, and AC wire accidentally touches a conductor, and somebody touches the conductor, and then what kind of harm it could create. So it could lead to a cardiac arrest, it could lead to burns. And then ultimately, what are the likelihood? What is the occurrence of that harm? And usually estimation of risk is severity times occurrence. Now, keep in mind, the standard does not say that it has to be this multiplication, but this is what I have seen most of the time. So what different hazards exist? So there are all kinds of energies. Either, we talked about voltage, electrical energy, magnetic fields is also included in there. You could have mechanical energy, falling objects, or gases under high pressure. You could have potential energy, spring that is compressed that suddenly gets released, something that is tense and then breaks. You could have radiation energy, especially from ionizing radiation such as X-rays, laser. Microwave is not ionizing, but it can heat. It can heat body tissue, so it does count. And speaking of heat, there are thermal energies. So cryogens are usually very low temperature objects, and it could be liquid nitrogen, liquid helium. They are very commonly used in MRI scanners. Or it could be hyperthermic, something that could get too hot and can cause burns or other kind of heat-related injuries. Then there are biological hazards, bacteria, fungi, some kind of toxins. Chemical hazards, the chemicals that you use on your product could be corrosive, or it could be flammable, especially lithium-ion batteries. Interestingly, data is also considered a hazard because incorrect access to data could pose a threat. Also, the availability, or rather lack of availability of data, is also an issue. There could be issues with the diagnostic, like if you are going to create images of the patient, and if there are artifacts, or if your examination results are misinterpreted, that's an issue. And then finally, the functional, the whole purpose of the device. It's supposed to do something, and there is a critical performance. That's why we are making that device. And if that doesn't work as expected, what could happen? So these are all the different examples of hazards. And for this talk, I thought I would, use an example from my childhood, the Star Trek. Some of you might remember this is Dr. Bones, and he's holding this device that they used to scan. Somebody was not feeling well, and I said, well, let's just make a hypothetical device that detects broken bones, and they just put in two kinds of energies in there. That, let's say that we scans the skin using laser to localize the surface, and then it emits infrared light and uses the light that gets reflected back to detect fracture. This is completely hypothetical device, but if you ever end up making one, make sure that you heard it from me. So give me some royalty. Anyway, so the way we would approach risk analysis is how different events lead to a harm, and it's usually formatted as either a document or a spreadsheet, and usually you have one situation per row. And in this case, we'll start with one hazard, so high voltage. And it's supposed to be a handheld device, but if you plug in the device to the wall socket to charge it, and let's say the short circuit makes line voltage, the 220 volt AC appear on the scanner, and the user touches. So just the short circuit is not enough. Somebody actually has to touch the device. And what could it cause? It causes serious burns to patients. And keep in mind here, the user is not the patient. The user is actually the doctor who is going to touch the device. So that was high voltage. The next is laser light. Remember, we use the laser light to do some kind of assessment of the skin. And let's say somebody has a broken nose and the user holds the device. Now, if the eyes are closed, it doesn't matter. But if the eyes are open, laser light could enter eyes, and that could be blinding of the patient. So this time, it's harm to the patient, but nothing malfunctioned. It was just a plain misuse of the product. The next is allergen. So you have a physical device and the user holds it in their palm, but the material you use in that device is allergenic. You could cause skin rashes, and this is a normal use, but it will affect only some users, not all users. The next is functional. Your device was supposed to detect fracture, and what if it didn't? No. And then the net result from that, and this is where you have to actually think of the harm. Not the fact that you fail to detect fracture is not the harm, but if the fracture gets unnoticed, what could happen? So of course there will be a pain, there will be some pain to the user, but in the end it could lead to deformed bones, and that's a type of device failure that you have to they have to look at. Sometimes what happens is from a hazard there could be different kinds of harms, and we usually consider the worst harm. And finally, user confusion. Somebody completely mistakes the low power light as a fracture and says, no, you have to go get x-rays. And this time the harm is radiation energy. Somebody goes through too many x-rays, and it actually comes from a different device. So keep in mind the harm that could happen need not come from your device. It needs to, that's where you have to analyze the entire situation. So then the next question is, when do you do it? We always recommend you do as early as possible, especially before you implement the design of your device. You obviously need to know something, and that's why we always consider this part of the design input phase. When you are gathering the user requirements, you are creating the plans, risk analysis is a critical part of gathering the requirements. And the reason we do this is because it can trigger some significant design changes. Like, for example, you might decide to not use laser completely and replace it with visible light. Or it can lead to a significant user interface design. For example, instead of a blinking light, you might actually want to put a battery icon that says that basically it clears any confusion, whether it's a low power or a broken bone. And depending on what kind of energies you have, it can lead to electrical safety testing needs. And that's where you may have to bring in different standards such as 60601-1. So the next part of risk analysis, now that you know what harm can happen, is to estimate the risk level from that harm. And as I said, that the standard does not actually prescribe you to do it in a certain way. But this is how I have seen it most of the time. It's occurrence times severity. And usually we assign numbers. So here I show a 5 by 5 matrix. It does not have to be a square. It can be a rectangle. And it's completely up to you how you define severity. Usually what I have seen is you go from the lowest severity, that is, there is no health impact. Somebody feels uncomfortable, but there is no health impact, all the way to 5, which is critical injury or death. Now, it doesn't have to be from 1 to 5. You can sometimes go 1 to 3. You can go 1 through 6, 1 through 10. If you look at the companion guidance on risk management, they always recommend at least a 5. So you can go more, but usually you run into issues if you have less than 5. So those are the columns along the severity. Then there are rows. So the occurrence, usually the lowest occurrence is less than certain percent. And here I just chose 0.01%. That's again, keep in mind, the standard says the risk is always there. It's never zero, the occurrence. And the highest typically is, if it happens more than 10% of the time, it's usually a 5. Now, based on that, when you multiply these numbers, we are going to get a matrix from 1 to 25. And we are going to divide this matrix into 3 parts, low, medium, and high risk. And the high risk is generally unacceptable. In what that means is, if your risk analysis shows that even after you did everything that you could, if your risk is high, either you don't ship the product or you demonstrate that the benefits of still shipping the products are so high that they outweigh even unacceptable risk. It's rare to see that. Now, one thing I always do is ensure that the transition from low to medium to high is gradual. You don't suddenly jump from low to high. And the way we define low, medium, high is with one example here, that if some hazard or some harm has a severity of 1, there is no impact. You should be able to ship the product, even if the occurrence is 5. So this blue circle here, that should not be a high. On the other end, if something is very high in severity, a critical injury or death, at 1, you should still be able to ship because it's less than 0.01%. But at 2, you probably should not be shipping that product. So this automatically becomes a high. And remember, we said we want to gradual transition. So if 10 is high, the lowest number here is a 5. So that cannot be a low. So 5 becomes medium. And this is how the whole matrix looks. So 10 and higher is high, unacceptable risk. 5 through 9 are medium risk. They are kind of getting a little concerning. So it's okay sometimes, but sometimes you should really try to be in the green zone, which is 1 through 4. All this needs to be written in your risk management plan, and this is where you need to say what is acceptable. The green and yellow zones are acceptable, red is not acceptable. So for each risk analysis entry, you need to do this. And if the risk is acceptable, you don't need to do any risk control. If it's not acceptable, you apply a risk control or risk mitigation to bring down the level of risk. And we'll see that on the next slide. Once you're all done with all the rows, that's when you evaluate the residual risk and decide, is that good enough? And that's what you typically write in your risk management report. So there are different kinds of risk control. They can either reduce the severity or occurrence. Most of the time, I have seen them reduce the occurrence. Very rarely they will reduce the severity. Now, one example of reducing severity is if you completely change the design. Instead of using lasers, you use visible light, the severity is much lower on that one. So the kind of risk controls are by design, and they are absolutely the best kind of controls you can have. The second kind are protective measures, some kind of shield on the product. They are still okay. You can still use them. The least preferred ones are information to user. If you say something in the user manual, in fact, we don't even use it. And all the companies that I have worked with, we do not use information to user to document a reduction of risk. We say that, yeah, we supply the information, but that's You're not going to count on it. And then you evaluate the residual risk. So when you talk about the controls of risk implementation, the standard doesn't say how to do it, but what I have seen done successfully is when you identify the controls with identifiers or requirement IDs. And the reason for that is when you do medical device design, you usually have requirements and then you verify those requirements, which means if you have the ID, it is very easy to trace to verification. Now, in an audit, they are going to ask you, what is the evidence that you actually implemented this? And this is where you can point to your verification report or executed verification protocols that say that, yes, this works. Now, here are some examples of controls for certain harms. So, for example, for high voltage, you could either go through electrical safety testing or grounding. For laser light, you can just replace it with visible light, and then you could put an icon to avoid, to tell the user that you should not shine that light into the eye. Now, keep in mind, this becomes information to the user, and you cannot use it to reduce the occurrence. For allergens, you could use some material certification by your supplier that the material is biocompatible. And this is where in many medical devices, you can use something known as a predicate, that you can tell the government that, oh, something like this already exists on the market, the same material. If to combat device failures, you could do self-test on power on to make sure that the infrared light was working in our sample device. And to avoid user confusion, you can construct a battery icon that is a completely different shape from the fracture icon. Now, keep in mind, you have to look at what happens if your risk control fails. For example, if you decide to put stickers of battery icon versus fracture icon, it's probably not going to work, because those stickers, after maybe a few months or few years of use, are going to lose the glue and fall off. So maybe you want to etch the icons into the device case itself. So here is the complete example. For our high voltage situation, we said the harm is serious burn. The severity is 4 because you need medical treatment for that kind of harm. The occurrence is 3. And then the multiplication of these through is 12, and we said 10 or higher is a high risk, so that became a red. So our control was our requirement number 10, that we are actually going to ground the scanner case. Now that means you have to use a 3-pin plug, a 2-pin plug won't work. That reduces the occurrence significantly to 1, and the risk is now in green zone, acceptable risk. So this is one sample row. You will do this for each hazard that you identified, or each sequence of events. One hazard could have multiple sequence of events that could lead either to the same harm or a different harm. But the idea there is, the different sequences may need different kind of controls. So sections 8 and 9 talk about the evaluation of residual risk. So after you're done all the rows, is the overall risk acceptable? So you document that in your report or summary, and then review and approval of all the documents and archive them in the design history file is section 9. So once you are done, that's not it. Once you start making the product, you could see some non-conformances or issues with the production process. You could start seeing problems during installation, during maintenance, during service, or it could be feedback from users, most notably complaints. And there could be, you may not even get it directly from the customer, but it could be public information. So you're supposed to use all these, review these, and document that you did the review. And it needs to be periodic, and that's what the auditors will ask you, that when was the last time you reviewed risk analysis, and reevaluate it as needed. There is one more part that used to be in the 14971 standard called Annex C, that is now moved to a companion standard. It's the guidance of application, it's 24971. And they ask 37 questions about the medical device. And those questions will guide you on what kind of hazards or sequence of events you need to mention in a risk analysis. Here are some samples. Is it a device intended to be implanted? Now, keep in mind, an implanted device that is under the skin, you typically need a surgery to put that device in. That usually goes through much more rigorous risk analysis and design controls to other compared to other devices, whether it is supplied sterile or it is sterilized by the user. If it needs calibration or maintenance, what happens if your device is uncalibrated and somebody use it when it is not working as expected? If it contains software, if it has a restricted shelf life, or is it not supposed to be used multiple times, and if it can be misused? All this details come together in your risk management file, and that's actually part of your design history file. And usually it contains three things: risk management plan, the analysis and report. And the risk analysis has all those rows we talked about: the hazard, sequence of event, risk assessment. It also includes the questionnaire and the risk controls, which are typically the identification of requirements. So that's for risk management, and that's concludes the risk and the management part. And Pranita, what do you want to do here? It's approximately 30 minutes.
Right, right. Uh, there is one question in the Q&A chat box, and if
Sure.
any participant have any question, they can raise their hand. We can unmute them at this moment if anybody have question, or they can put it in the chat box. One question here is that any of these compliances are required for non-critical wearables similar to smartwatches? And what about user data privacy issues? That's from one of the anonymous attendee here.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question, because especially with high-tech devices, smartphones, smartwatches, that is becoming a thing. Now, the first question you have to ask yourself is, would you consider what you are making, either software or hardware or both, is that really a medical device? And that is the first question you have to answer. And again, there are guidances, multiple guidances on what should be considered a medical device, what should not be considered a medical device. If I remember correctly, Apple, when they first introduced Apple Health, it was not a medical device. And I think, if I remember right, one of their devices, it is Apple Watch that can monitor you for falls. I think they do consider it a medical device. So that's the first question you should ask. If your device is not a medical device, many of these things may not even apply. But if you consider it as a medical device, and if the government, more importantly, if the government considers that as a medical device, then at least the three things that apply is 13485 quality management system that we covered in the last talk, 14971 risk analysis, and 6236 is usability. Now, depending on if you have software or hardware, the other standards might apply. But my gut feel is, if you are going to make a wearable device that is supposed to be for medical use, it is, all these apply. Does that answer the question?
I hope so. There is one more question, again from anonymous attendee. Risk management plan is prepared with respect to the trial participant or the product? I could not get the question correctly, but if you can.
Right. So I'm not sure I understand. So the risk management plan, risk analysis, and risk report are always per device. It's not per user of the device, or even if you have clinical trials, it's not for the clinical trial. It's actually for the device or the thing that you are making. So hopefully that answers the question. Now, having said that, if you are going for a clinical trial and you want to assess the risk for clinical trial, almost always you are going to look back on the risk of the device. What is it that you are making? The risk of that absolutely applies.
Okay, okay. I think on that line, I would like to ask you one question. So ISO 13485 is for organization.
Yes.
And risk management is basically for the per product.
For
So
each device, for each product that you are making.
Yes, each device. So every time we make, or a startup make a new device or some,
Correct.
Even if they, let's say they do some alteration or they tweak something, that also needs some kind of a risk again to go through that?
Well, it depends. So when you tweak something, are you going to sell it as a completely different device, or is that the same device as a design change? So there is something called a design change for this product, and there you have to do a lot less work. if it's a change to your existing device. And the way it works is, for any change, you have to document what is the impact of that change. Almost always the question comes up, what is the impact on the risk? And you typically go through a design change process to implement the change. You many times you end up revising your existing design history file, your risk analysis, requirements, verification, but you typically don't create new documents for that. Now, there are situations when the design change you are making to your product has, triggers a new submission, because you're changing the intended use or some operating principle. You have to go back to the government and say that, oh, now my users are going to use this device in this different way. Okay, now that usually means you need to have you could call it as an extension of the device, and you typically need a new design history file for that, because what you want to tell the government is, until you approve this this change, this extension, I'm not going to ship it with my device. So you don't want to modify the design history file of your original device.
Got it. Thanks, Sanjay. I
Okay.
think we have a couple of questions
Sure.
here. Uh, Again, there's this anonymous attendee asking how to assign severity of harm when a medical device is an organ or a tissue preservation device. It is only a binary as far as I see, either organ is viable or not. So how does 3 by 3 or 4 by 4 matrix can be applied here?
Absolutely. So let's go back to our matrix. Right, I am here now. Basically, it's not. Let's say that you have a. Let's take the simplest example, that you have a fingernail that you are going to replace. Right. What can happen if the fingernail is rejected by the body? I'm only going to guess here that your severity is probably going to be in the 3-4 region. Now, if the device you are going to replace is a heart, it's a big deal, because the severity is straight 5. So the matrix tells you is not specific to what is it that you are making. What about the sterility of the effectively the product you are making, if that product is like a mechanical kidney, right? Effectively, that's the product you are making, and what could go wrong with that product. So I believe the matrix still applies. How to use it, is 5 by 5 going to be enough for you? I don't know. This is why the standard does not even say that you have to use it in a matrix form. It's an option, and most of the time you've seen this option. Try it out. If it doesn't work for you, either you can try to add more rows or columns to severity of occurrence, and if that still doesn't work, again, I don't exactly know how else you would do it, but you may want to consult somebody who is well versed with with the tissue or organ side of things.
Okay. On the same line, I think, and one more question is what to do when there is no classification of minor harm, medium harm, major harm, and critical harm? I guess you partly answered that already, but if you want to touch upon that again.
Right. So the standard does not say how to assess the severity of the harm. It's completely up to you how to do it. And here, the way we have done it is, when you go from 1 through 5, well, 1 is no health impact, let's say. It's up to you on how you, and this is what you need to write down in your risk management plan and risk analysis, that this is how we define severity of the harm with examples. Like we said 1 is no health impact. 2 could be, it's an irritation that goes away, but you don't need to go and see the doctor. 3 could be that, oh, you need it's a temporary or transient and transient harm. Like, for example, it's a burn that it's a minor burn that gets treated. There are no long-term effects of the burn. So that could be a 3. 4 could be something that has long-term effect, but it's not critical, right? I mean, you could be left with a scar, but that's pretty much it. You might end up taking long treatment, but that's it. 5 could be a critical injury, like you could paralyze somebody, or you could cause death, or you could cause dismemberment. Something could get chopped off. That usually becomes a 5. And again, depending on what kind of granularity you need, you don't have to stop at 5. You could say that, no, I need 6 or 8 or 10. And same thing about the occurrence. It's up to you. For example, here I was thinking 5 is more than 10%, 4 could be 1%, 3 could be 0.1%, 2 could be 0.05, and one is less than 0.01. But again, it depends on the kind of product you are making. This may not, this might work for you, this may not work for you. It's completely up to you on how to create this thing. And this is where the experience in risk analysis absolutely becomes helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so we have a couple of questions on point of care devices here.
Mm-hmm.
The question is from Mohini. According to CDSCO Class A to D classification state, higher level of risk for diagnostic test is Class
Mm-hmm.
D,
Mm-hmm.
which falls under bedside or POC. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
designing a test kit for a POC, which is for pregnant women, which at no risk, where do I classify my test kit? POC, but patient in no critical situation, no risk for sampling.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. So like, again, Mohini, let me rephrase the question. What you are creating effectively is a measuring device. It's going to give you either a yes or a no for the pregnancy, right? And then again, I will still recommend, if you are going to market it as a medical device, you put the risk analysis here, and now there are the severities that you have to consider is what kind of harm could come when the device, in this case, it could be, again, different kinds of hazard. Your energy hazard is probably going to be low, but the functionality hazard, what if the device fails? Right, if it doesn't detect it correctly, or it tells the woman that she's pregnant when in fact she is not, and the other way, she say that the woman is not pregnant when in fact she is. Now you always have to think about the harm that could happen, right? If the device says that, oh, you are not pregnant, but in reality you are, the woman may not get the health care that she needs in the early stages of pregnancy. And what kind of harm that could cause, and again, what is the probability of occurrence of that? And then the other example of that could be user confusion, especially if your device has, I remember seeing, the bars that appear or don't appear. And let's say that you are going to use color and somebody's colorblind. They can't distinguish the greens versus the reds. That could be a problem, that they might misinterpret something. Or if it's not related to color, but they just get confused. Or language could be a big deal. If your instructions there are in English and the person doesn't know English, that could be a problem. So those are the different kind of hazards or harm you could consider, and different kind of severity that comes of it. Based on the device, my guess is most of the time your severity is going to fall in the lower end of spectrum.
Okay, okay. I think I have question on this line, but before that, there is one question from Anshika here in the chat box. Is risk analysis will be applicable for Class C and Class D medical device and IVD? And what is the frequency of revision of the document? Just before you answer this question, I just want to make one thing clear is that CDSO approvals and the classification of device is completely different. It will be based on of course, the guidelines from their end and the risk factor where that device can classify themselves between A to D. And
Mhm.
of course, the risk analysis which will be conducting for ISO, there will be some connection, of course, some data and all that. However, it has to be done for all the devices. Right, the way Sanjay explained is that any device has to go through this, product has to go through this. CDSU approval and classification will be different thing. However, on the same line, I also have a question is that most of the time when there is devices, medical devices, it is advised by the CDSO that it should get ISO and IEC done. Prior they initiate the clinical validation,
Mhm.
and that is when they'll have to probably go through all these IEC and ISO. But in case of a IVD and these kind of a POC testing kits and all, how important it is to be, is it really necessary to do all these initially before CDSC or clinical validation approval? This
I,
kind
I
of.
I I would say absolutely, because before they approve your device, again, I stop me if I don't answer your question, okay, Pranita. So the first part of the question, well, there are different classifications of the device. right? The ABCDs, and like how you have in India, there are EU has a class 1, then 2A, 2B, 3. US has the same thing, class 1, 2, 3. The classification of the device, as Pranita said, is a completely different game, right? The risk analysis is, no matter what your classification is, you still have to do risk analysis. Again, what changes is the severity and occurrence based on the classification of your device. If your device is, has a low risk, you are going to fall pretty much in this zone up here. If it's a high risk, you are going to fall mostly in the red zone. Having said that, risk analysis is still critical. Before you go to the government for approval for any studies, any clinical studies, they obviously, any government wants to protect its people. They are going to ask you, you are going to do what to my patients? And at that time, if you don't have your risk analysis, you will be in a tough spot to explain why even for clinical trials, this is safe. So doing risk analysis is going to be really, really helpful to get the approvals for government. And at some point, we have to think, why are we in this business? One is obviously to make money, to make products, but at the end of the day, we owe something to our customers, to our users. They are human beings. They're somebody's mother, somebody's son, somebody's father, right? Before you put a market product on the market, imagine that, that you didn't even consider something and your device malfunction and harm somebody critically, and let's say they are on the front page of Times of India. That's not going to go well. So just do it properly. It doesn't really matter what the standard says or does. Ultimately, in your heart, you have to think what is right. And I would say, analyzing the risks that are associated with your device or product is the right thing to do. So do not skip it, do it. Pranita, does that answer the
Yeah, yeah,
question?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think the first part of Anshika's question is the risk analysis will be applicable for Class C and Class D medical devices of
Yes.
IVD. You have answered that. There's another part of the question is what is the frequency of revision of
Oh,
the
yes,
document?
correct. So again, the standard does not say how frequently you need to review the document. So typically what we do is during the design phase, we go through a phased design review. So there is a design input review, then a ready for verification review, a design output review, a design transfer review. In each of these reviews, we review the whole risk management file. If usually there are updates to the risk management file, in all those 4 phases, but that's it. That's basically at the end of the device design. Now, having done that, if you remember from the 13485 talks, you have to monitor the product, right? There is a management review you have to do. And one of the components of management review that, again, you define what the frequency is. Typically what I have seen is sometimes once a quarter, once every 6 months, once a year. Rarely you will do less than once a year. So in that, and sometimes it could be even a monthly update to the management on what's going on. I would say less than a month is a very unusual. But let's say on the monthly analysis, you are going to look at all the complaints that come from the field, and all the manufacturing issues that you are seeing. And what you have to decide is, do any of these trigger a review of risk analysis? And it may not, but it gets written in your management review. And this is where documentation becomes critical. An auditor comes to you and says, when was the last time you reviewed this product? And you can pull up your latest management report saying that, yep, 2 months ago when we did the review, we looked at the complaints. There were 16 complaints, and then we determined that 14 of them did not really need any risk management review. 2 of them did, and we reviewed the risk, and we decided to up or increase the probability of occurrence by 1 notch. And here is the revised version of risk analysis document that says that. So that's an example that you could use. Again, my recommendation is, choose something that makes sense to you for the periodic review of risk analysis.
Right, right. Sanjay, I think here Manjiri in the chat box is asking about how to prepare risk benefit analysis, probably it's risk analysis so device which can measure stress level, sampling saliva. If we can take her example, device example, and just probably think about some risk which can come up or hazard which it can cause.
I'm not sure I understand. At
Uh,
least, can you give me some more details? You are sampling the saliva to do what?
So yeah, probably Mohini, you'll have to type it out and give us more information to measure stress level and sampling saliva about your device, and probably we can say
Oh,
something.
maybe I understood it. Your device is going to sample the saliva to figure out the stress level. Is that a
Uh,
correct
I
assessment?
I think so with the
Well,
question
let's assume that that's the no.
stipulated. Yeah.
Basically, you always have to think what is it, what is it that your device is supposed to do. So sampling the saliva is a means to get to the result. The result is what really matters. And let's say that what matters is determination of stress level. And let's take for example that this device is something that people will use at their home, so not in doctor's office. They are going to take the saliva and let's say it's going to have a green, yellow, red light. Right now, based on that, if they are going to determine should I take my stress reduction pill or not take it, right now you have to think of the risk that if the device malfunctions and tells them their risk is too that their stress level is too high, and your patients start taking the pill when they don't need to, you have to worry about the side effects of that pill. On the other hand, if they don't take the pill, if your device says that no, your stress levels are just fine, and the stress level is high, what happens? And again, sometimes you could mitigate that. Oh, it needs to be under the prescription of a doctor, and they need to periodically go and see the doctor to monitor the progress. Maybe the device reports the data directly onto an online portal, and then the portal says that, yep, here is when the doctor actually needs to intervene and take some action. So that could be one example of how you could apply risk analysis for severity and occurrence. Did I answer the question, Pranita or Manjiri?
I think so, but if Manjari, if you have any follow-on question for this or any query or question, please do type it in the chat box.
Oh,
I
no,
think
actually, you know what, Pranita? No, I think if I remember right, her question was how to document the risk benefit analysis.
how
I
to
think that was one
prepare
part of the
risk.
question. Yes. So usually, if your risk management plan says that low and medium risks are acceptable, and after you did all your mitigations, after you completed everything, each row of your risk analysis had either a green or a yellow, you're done, because you say none of my risks are unacceptable. I don't need a risk benefit analysis. You need to write that down in the report and get it reviewed and approved, of course. But let's say that there are still risks that are in the red zone. Then you have to really think about the risk benefit analysis, that yes, that you understand that there is a high level of risk, and why is it still okay to ship the product at that level of risk. And usually you want to bring in clinical experts on that, who are going to vouch for it and say that I approve that, even if this risk is high, the device is still, it does something so critical that we absolutely need it.
uh, right, Sanjay. I think you have answered, but Mohini is the same person who asked that question about,
Okay.
according to CDSCO Class A to Class D classification states, level of risk for diagnostic test kit, and POC by what where to classify this device basically. So I think we answered that partly, and she was just mentioning that the device is to measure stress level or sampling saliva. But I think with that also we got a lot of insight, Sanjay. We have one question from Kamlesh Patel. Is that what about the health application for patients where 2 to 3 devices are integrated in the health application?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Health application. What about the
Yes.
health application for patient? For one patient where 2 to 3 devices are integrated,
Mhm,
wherein devices are ISO and IEC approved, still
mhm.
need to go for entire product app plus device as ISO and IEC certification, as in entire thing.
So if I rephrase the question, let's say that you have 3 different devices that have their own ISO or IC certification. They are done. Let's say that they have the approval, they have the certification. They are actually released. They're approved by the government. Now, let's say that you are making a fourth product which integrates these 3 products into one. Right now, if you are going to sell that as a medical device product, and it could be a software only product. The question is, what could happen if that integration fails? And it could be incompatible things, it could show that it's connected but not connected. So that's where your risk benefit the risk analysis comes into picture. But first thing I would recommend you do is go through the guidances on different government will have different guidances, and usually they are published on the government website, that should you even consider the product you are making as a medical device. If you consider, if the government is going to treat your product as a medical device, then absolutely you need to follow all this. If not, it's really up to you. I would still say that it's a sane thing to do. It's a safe thing to do. That if anybody challenges you, that what are the different things that could go wrong, you at least have some documentation that proves it. Now imagine you are a startup company, right? And you are done with your product, you are about to launch the product. Now you are looking for buyers for your company, and the buyers are naturally, they don't know the product as well as you do. So they are going to ask you, well, it's all great, you have designed it all fine, what happens if if your product doesn't work? And if at that time, if you can pull out the risk analysis and say, yep, we looked at that already. Here is all the bad things that could happen. Not real, that may not be part of our product. It may come from a different product. And here is our analysis. And here is how we say that even if those bad things happen, we have controls in place to mitigate the risk. And that's why this is a safe and sound design. So even for potential buyers or potential customers of your product, it could be a very useful thing.
Right. I think we have 5 minutes left here.
Right.
We can take 2 questions from chat box, and Manjiri she has raised her hand, so we will unmute her. But before doing that, Kamlesh has a second follow-up question, and I feel it is very important to answer that. If the point of care device is FDA or CE approved, still need to go for ISO or IEC? We assume that if FDA or CE approved, would have taken care of ISO and IEC.
Well, I mean, whose device it is, that's the first question. If the device is yours, then obviously you have done your bit to get it approved. Almost all governments are going to ask you to provide risk management of your device. So if the device is already approved, you can safely assume that the device itself has its own risk management file, and so on and so forth. Now, if that device is not made by you, it's made by somebody else, obviously you don't have access to their risk management file. You have to focus on the product that you are making. If your product is the integration product from all the devices, you don't worry about what could go wrong with each of the 3 or 4 devices that are happening. What you need to worry is what could go wrong when they send their data to you. That either they send the wrong data, they send corrupted data, or they don't send data. And how are you going to handle that interaction? Are you going to show the status of connectivity? Are you going to show correct message to the user? Hey, I have not received more recent data from this device. Or are you going to show some kind of alarm? You need to focus on your product, because you literally, what control do you have on a product that's not owned by you, right? I mean, pretty much nothing. So focus on your product only for the risk analysis, but take into account that the device that you are interacting with is going to fail, and how do you handle that failure? So that's what you have to think about. By the way, if you are talking about software integration, you also have to think about malware. That what if something poses as the device tries to connect to your system and starts sending all kind of malicious data?
Okay. I think, Sanjay, there could be another angle for this question, could be that if my device, point of care device, is FDA and CE approved, I still need to go to ISO IEC. But I assume that probably you have already done the ISO certification and IEC before even going to these agencies, because they will definitely ask you to do this, or at least need some kind of a documentation, what kind of a quality management practices you are doing at your this thing. So I think
Correct. So
yeah.
One thing to clarify there, Pranita, is that the governments typically do not say that you have to have the certification to the standards. So it's not a requirement. It's recommended. It's not a requirement. So technically speaking, somebody could go to the government and get their device or product approved without going through ISO or IC certification. That's totally possible.
Okay.
However, the kind of documentation, the kind of paperwork you need to submit is probably compliant with the ISO thing anyway. So once your device is cleared by the government, do you need to go through a third-party certification for ISO? Absolutely not. But if you are trying to sell your company to somebody, and the potential buyer says that no, I don't trust the government certification, you show me that your device is certified, then yes, you probably want to go through it.
Oh, thanks, Sanjay, for that information. I think I'll also update this information on my end as well. I think we'll just take one last question from
Sure.
Manjiri here. She has raised her hand. We'll unmute her. And Manjiri, you can unmute yourself now and ask the question.
Yeah, good evening, sir. I want to know regarding the risk benefit analysis. Is it okay? Are you hearing me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Regarding the risk benefit analysis, when we are going to summarize this risk document at that time, while making it for risk benefit analysis, whether we have to consider all risk or for not acceptable risk, we have to prepare this risk benefit analysis.
Correct. So in your risk report, if I go down here, so your risk management file typically has the plan, analysis, and report. This is the risk management report is when you kind of summarize the entire risk analysis.
Yes.
That's when you say that we considered hazards of all these kinds. We looked at the risk, and after mitigations, after applying risk controls, here are the highest risk that we have from the product. And the highest risk is actually medium. It is acceptable. So further risk benefit analysis is not necessary. Or you might say that out of all the hazards, we had like whatever, 40, 50 rows, and 2 of them, where the risk was still high, even after the risk controls. And here is why that is still okay. And all that paperwork needs to be in the risk management report.
Okay.
So it's usually one document typically towards the end or towards the end of your design and development phase, where you have to make that judgment.
Yeah, I have prepared such a document, and I have mentioned the acceptable, non-acceptable. That means after pre and post control.
Correct.
And after that, for risk benefit analysis, summarize whether I have to consider. I will have considered only non-acceptable risk there.
Usually, yeah, that's the only thing you need to focus on. But even if all your risk is acceptable, you actually need to say it in the report that yes, per our plan, the risk is acceptable.
But for that non-acceptable risk, whether I have to mention that whether after redesigning the product, we can able to work on this risk, or it is not necessary.
So the risk that you talk about, Manjari, in the risk management report is always after the mitigation, after you have done all the design changes to address the risk. It's not before.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Manjari. Sanjay, I think we'll have to, I think it's past 6 o'clock.
Right.
But before, there is one question from Praveen, and he's keen on the answer because he's keep writing this question. I'll just ask this last question and we'll close it here.
Sure.
So Praveen is from Terra Lumen Solution, and the startup is developed a medical device to detect non-invasive breast cancer using far infrared. So under which risk class do our medical device pertaining to oncology will be categorized? Which risk class?
Right. So that's the question that's not actually in scope of risk management. It's the medical device classification. And usually what you need is somebody who is well experienced in the regulatory affairs. So either if you have your own regulatory affairs department, they can make a recommendation. You can also go to a consultant who is a regulatory affairs consultant and get a recommendation. And usually when you submit for clearance or approval to government, you have to say what classification you are seeking. And I would highly recommend going to a regulatory affairs person. to do.
Yeah. So Praveen, you can approach CDSCO people. Even BIRAC has this. They conduct one session where regulatory people from CDSCO, DCGI, they all come and they address the question of startup for almost an hour or so, and that happens, I think, once in 2 months. So if you have any such question, you can write to BIRAC as well or CDSCO. You can actually go and meet them even at Delhi, and
Absolutely.
in-person meeting would always be beneficial. Or there are consultants, a consultant which can help you, even CROs, through the regulatory process, where they can help you classify the device appropriately. So I think I think we'll stop here with the questions, and of course with this I would like to thank all the participants and who has actually around this time they have there are still many participants, they're asking questions. So thank you so much for participating here in this session actively and asking questions, interacting with us. And thank you so much, Sanjay. Thank you so much for your support and such an interesting talk. I think we'll continue on this as well.
Absolutely, you are quite welcome. And again, thank you for hosting this, Pranita. Again, great job comparing, and many thanks to the participant. Very interesting questions. Thank you, and keep up
Yeah,
the good work.
thank you everyone, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Sanjay.